At first it looked like a small and almost embarrassing moment, the kind of moment powerful people try to pretend never happened. A tall man in an expensive coat stood near the entrance of a crowded restaurant on New Year's Eve, and for the first time in many years he was told a simple word he was not used to hearing. No. The hostess smiled politely but firmly and explained that every table had been reserved weeks ago. The room behind her was bright with warm lights and laughter. Glasses clinked together. People celebrated the final hours of the year with friends and family. But the man standing at the door remained alone. His name was Daniel Carter, the CEO of one of the largest technology companies in the country. A billionaire whose decisions moved markets and changed the direction of entire industries. Yet in that moment none of that power seemed to matter. He stood quietly with his hands in the pockets of his coat while the cold winter air slipped through the opening door each time someone entered. People passed by him without recognizing him. And perhaps that was the strangest part of the evening, because Daniel Carter was used to rooms becoming silent when he entered them. He was used to people standing, shaking his hand, asking for attention, asking for favors, but tonight he was simply another guest without a reservation, another stranger hoping for a seat that did not exist. The hostess apologized again and gently suggested another restaurant a few blocks away. Daniel nodded calmly and thanked her, but he did not move right away. Instead he glanced into the crowded dining room for a moment, watching the warm lights, the families, the couples laughing together, and something quiet and heavy settled in his chest. It had been a long time since he had spent a night like this with anyone. The last few years of his life had been filled with meetings, flights, negotiations, headlines, awards, interviews, and endless responsibility. Success had come quickly and completely, but somewhere along that path many small and important things had slowly disappeared. Friendships faded, family gatherings became rare, and eventually the person he once loved walked away from a life that always seemed too busy for simple happiness. Now the world knew him as a brilliant and unstoppable businessman, but very few people knew how quiet his evenings had become. The hostess was about to close the door again when suddenly a voice from inside the restaurant called out. It was not loud, but it carried through the room with surprising clarity. A man sitting at a nearby table stood up slowly and raised his hand. He was dressed simply, his jacket slightly worn, his hair a little messy. Beside him sat a small girl with bright, curious eyes in a pink dress. The man smiled gently and waved toward the entrance. For a second everyone in the room turned to look. The hostess looked confused. Daniel looked even more surprised. The man spoke calmly and said that they had an extra chair at their table. If the gentleman at the door did not mind sharing dinner with strangers. The offer hung in the air for a moment. It was such an ordinary gesture that it felt almost unusual in a place filled with formal reservations and expensive menus. Daniel hesitated for only a second, then nodded politely and stepped inside. The warmth of the restaurant wrapped around him immediately. The smell of roasted food and fresh bread filled the air, and as he walked toward the table he noticed how people were quietly observing the strange situation unfolding in front of them. The man extended his hand with a friendly smile and introduced himself as Michael. The little girl beside him quickly added that her name was Lily and that it was almost midnight and they were waiting for fireworks. Daniel sat down slowly, thanking them both for their kindness. The chair felt strangely comfortable, like a place he had not known he needed. For the first few minutes the conversation was simple and slightly awkward, the kind of polite talk strangers exchange at shared tables. Lily spoke about school and her excitement for the new year. Michael listened patiently and occasionally laughed at her endless curiosity. Daniel mostly listened, answering small questions when they were directed at him. He did not mention his company or his wealth, and Michael did not ask. To him Daniel was simply a man who needed a place to sit on a cold evening. As time passed something unexpected began to happen. The quiet tension Daniel carried with him started to fade. Lily insisted that he try one of the desserts. Michael joked about how she believed chocolate cake could solve every problem in the world. Daniel smiled more than he had in weeks, maybe even months. The simple warmth of their table felt strangely rare. Outside the restaurant windows snow had begun falling softly, covering the street with a thin silver layer. Inside the room people were counting down the last minutes of the year. Glasses were raised, laughter grew louder, and just before midnight Lily suddenly asked Daniel a very direct question. She asked if he had family waiting for him somewhere tonight. The question was innocent, but it landed gently and deeply. Daniel paused for a moment before answering honestly that no one was waiting for him. Lily looked surprised and then thoughtful, as if she was trying to solve a puzzle that did not make sense to her. Michael quietly changed the subject and began talking about the fireworks that would soon start over the river nearby. But Daniel noticed the girl watching him with quiet sympathy. Midnight finally arrived. The entire restaurant erupted with cheers. Strangers hugged, glasses touched together, and through the large windows bright fireworks exploded across the sky in red and gold bursts of light. Lily clapped excitedly and pulled both men closer to the window to watch. For a brief moment Daniel forgot about business deals, boardrooms, and numbers on screens. He simply stood there beside two people he had met less than an hour ago and watched the sky fill with color. When the celebration slowly settled down they returned to their table and finished the last of their dinner. Daniel thanked them again for their generosity, explaining that their simple invitation had meant more than they probably realized. Michael shrugged modestly and said that sometimes kindness costs nothing but still changes a whole evening. Eventually it was time to leave. Coats were put on. The restaurant began emptying as people stepped out into the snowy night. Daniel shook Michael's hand firmly and wished Lily a happy new year. Then he walked out toward the quiet street where his driver was waiting with the car. The door closed softly behind him and the car moved slowly through the sleeping city. But Daniel did not look at his phone or open his laptop as he usually did. Instead he watched the snow through the window and thought about the strange kindness he had just experienced. The next morning the world returned to its usual rhythm. Offices opened, emails filled inboxes, meetings resumed, and Daniel returned to his role as the powerful leader everyone expected him to be. Yet something from the night before remained in his mind. A simple table, a small girl's laughter, a stranger offering a chair without expecting anything in return. A week later Daniel asked his assistant to find the name of the restaurant he had visited on New Year's Eve. It was not difficult. The reservation list included the name Michael Hayes and one child. Daniel spent a moment looking at the name thoughtfully before making a quiet decision. Meanwhile Michael's life continued in its usual modest way. He worked long hours as a mechanic at a small garage, raising Lily alone since her mother had passed away years earlier. Money was often tight but their small apartment was filled with patience and warmth. Lily often spoke about the man they had shared dinner with, wondering where he lived and if he had found friends to celebrate the new year with. Michael smiled and told her that sometimes people appear in our lives for a short moment simply to remind us of kindness. Several days later a letter arrived at the garage where Michael worked. The envelope carried the logo of one of the largest companies in the country. Inside was a simple message inviting Michael to visit the company's headquarters for a meeting. Confused but curious he took a day off and traveled to the towering building downtown. The reception desk guided him to a quiet office on the top floor. And when the door opened he saw Daniel Carter standing by the window. Michael immediately recognized him from the restaurant and laughed in surprise. Daniel welcomed him warmly and thanked him once again for the invitation that night. Then he explained something Michael had never imagined. During their conversation at dinner Daniel had quietly noticed Michael's deep knowledge of mechanical systems and engineering. The way he described his work with calm passion, Daniel revealed that his company was expanding into advanced transportation technology and needed people who truly understood machines, not just executives in suits. The offer he presented was simple but life-changing, a position in the company's engineering division with training, support, and a salary that would completely transform Michael's future. Michael stood speechless for several seconds, struggling to understand how one small act of kindness had led to such an unexpected opportunity. Daniel simply smiled and said that sometimes the most important qualities in a person appear in the smallest moments. Weeks later Michael began his new job. Lily proudly told everyone at school that her father worked in a tall building with glass windows that touched the clouds, and Daniel Carter occasionally visited the engineering floor just to check how things were going. Each time he passed Michael's desk they exchanged a quiet nod of understanding. Neither of them needed many words to remember the night when a crowded restaurant had no room for a billionaire, but a small table with two kind strangers had space for something much greater than wealth. It had space for humanity.